So, you're Paul Thissen?
It's Thissen.
Thissen, okay.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, so Paul Thissen. Tell us about your background.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Minnesota. I grew up in Bloomington. My folks were both public school teachers and lived here all my life except for going away to school. And I'm married now. My wife and I have 3 kids, a 10-year-old daughter and 7 and 6-year-old boys. And you know, originally my family settled in Minnesota in the 1860s, out in western Minnesota along the Minnesota River, and then my grandfather moved to Blooming Prairie, and so that's where our family farm is, that my dad grew up on, and it's still in the family, although my cousin's living there now. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
So why do you want to become the 40th governor of Minnesota?
I didn't know that was the number. It's pretty simple. And growing up here in Minnesota, this has always been a place that I think most of us believe is a pretty special, extraordinary state. And I think that we have lost that in the last decade or so, that spirit has diminished. And I want to be governor because I want to get back there. I think our leaders have been telling us we can't have that anymore, or that you know, that's either it's unaffordable, or that Minnesota is not in a position in the global economy to achieve that kind of greatness anymore. And I think that that's just wrong. And I want to challenge Minnesotans to start thinking big again about what we can accomplish together. And I think that that's really what we're going to need to turn this thing around.
Could you be more specific on the areas where you mentioned where we've fallen short in the past decade or so?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just think it's a spirit and an attitude that has changed. But I think if you look at what's happened in healthcare in the state of Minnesota, we still are among the leaders in the country, but if we're comparing ourselves against the rest of the world, I think we can do a lot better, and we have to do a lot better. If you look at education, and especially if we're thinking about ourselves in a global economy, we do well among some of the states as we compare ourselves to some states, but we've been slipping there as well. But more importantly, it's our really smart kids that are doing well, are really well prepared, but some of our poorer and less, coming from less prosperous families, they're falling behind, and we need to fix that. I think if you look at our infrastructure, we certainly haven't been making the investments that we need to make sure that we have the best roads, the best transit system, the best waterworks, all those kind of public infrastructure things that we used to have and used to pride ourselves on. So in a whole variety of areas, I think that that's the case.
Okay. What are going to be your primary goals then for this position of becoming governor?
Well, the first thing that I think the make or break issue in the short term that's really critical is health care, and making sure both that people have access to health care, but that we bring down the cost of health care for families and for businesses, but also for our state government. If you look at the growth of health care within our state government, it is going to eat up most of the resources that we have to spend on all the important things that we need if we don't do that. And so that'll be my top priority, and I'm chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. I've been working really hard on that, and I think I can come into the governor's office and get immediately after that issue. Beyond that, I think that we have to focus back on our infrastructure, on transportation, making sure that we can get goods to market, making sure that our roads are safe, making sure that all those things are happening. Focus on early childhood education and higher education. I think if we were to free up dollars from bringing down healthcare costs, the first place I'd put those dollars is into early childhood and higher education, because I think that's where we get the biggest bang for our buck into the future. And then the last thing is economic development, and making sure that all of our communities are working as effectively and efficiently as possible, and that there are good jobs being created, and that there continue to be vibrant communities all over the state.
Okay. Actually, given today's economic climate, how would you do things differently than our current governor, Tim Pawlenty?
Well, the first thing is, I don't think anybody who looks at Minnesota today compared to where it was when he came into office would say that things have been going in the right direction. I mean, our unemployment rates for the first time in history are at or above or just below, but in the range of the national rates. So we need to be doing better. That's clearly the case. You know, in terms of generating a better economy, I think there's a couple things that we need to focus on. One is we do have some tools at the state level available to us through the bonding bill. I think through the new legacy amendment, through our transportation bill where we can get people to work much more quickly and immediately. I'm not as sold on kind of tax giveaways to move businesses from one part of the state to another part of the state, except in very targeted circumstances. What I think is more important right now is to use those dollars to back up small loans. It seems to me the real problem we have with business and the economy right now is still the tight credit that's going on. And so if we can back up small business loans to let them invest and start hiring people, I think that would go a long way to making a difference. And I think the last thing that I'd say is that Governor Plenty has focused so much on taxes in this state that I think he sells Minnesota short. And when you're going around telling people that this is a bad place to do business because our taxes are too high, that doesn't do Minnesota very well. And when in fact our energy costs relative to the rest of the country are low, our healthcare costs for the quality we get are relatively low. So a lot of the business inputs that we have, plus our workforce, is very productive relative to the rest of the country. So I think the next governor has to be going out and saying Minnesota's a great place to be doing business, and you should come here for all those reasons. And it's not just about taxes alone.
This may be a difficult question to answer, but what has the current governor, Tim Pawlenty, done right?
Oh, well, I think he's actually put out some good ideas. We've worked with him on some of the healthcare reform and the payment reform. He did come along ultimately on energy policy, which I think makes some good sense. My oftentimes bigger criticism of Governor Pawlenty is not the ideas that he comes out in favor of, although I disagree with a lot of those, but he does have good ones, but it's the lack of the follow-through. So I think that he has done some good things in the area of thinking about how we need to start reforming our healthcare system. We have to go a lot farther than I think he would go, and then the energy policy stuff.
Okay. How would you describe your political views? Conservative Democrat, Liberal Democrat, or something else?
Yeah, well, I think probably a pragmatic Democrat. I think some of my policies would, and some of my attitudes would tend toward the liberal side, some would tend toward the moderate side. I'm really looking for what makes sense and what is going to help ordinary Minnesotans. And so it's hard to put a across-the-board label, I think, on where I'm coming from. In general, it's trying to do the smart stuff to get things done.
Okay. What other Democrat would you say most closely aligns with your political views, if you were to...
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think, you know, if I were to think about historically speaking, Robert Kennedy is the guy that I most greatly admire. Because he, I think, came from two things. He was a very practical guy in his policies, and he tried to do stuff to help people and empower people in a very practical way. And I think that issue of empowerment is really important to me. But he also had a really strong moral sense, and I think that's something we've been lacking a little bit in our politics. That, you know, for instance, when the governor vetoed the GAMC program, so the healthcare program we have for our very poorest Minnesotans, you know, I think that is getting away from the moral compass of where most Minnesotans are, and we need to return to this idea that there are some things, some lines that we just don't cross as a state.